To discuss this further, let's turn to our panel. In Beirut, we have Basem Shabb. He is a member of parliament for the Future Movement Party. Also, Victoria Khoury. She is a political candidate for the Sabaa party. And completing our panel is Lebanese political analyst and lecturer Halim Shebaya. Thanks all so much for joining us. Basem, let me begin with you, and I'd like to get your thoughts on first this new electoral system. Some are praising it because they say it finally opens the door to political newcomers and more independent candidates, while others are saying it actually favors the wealth of the older established parties like yours, for example. Where do you stand?
I think this new electoral law has advantages and disadvantages. It's a new game in town, and I think the tendency of most people is not to accept a new game very easily without having concerns. But the fact is that the principle of proportionality being introduced into the Lebanese electoral system is something good, and I think it is something novel, and I think it benefits diversity, it benefits minorities, it benefits independence, and I think it has forced certain alliances that otherwise would have been impossible. But has also disadvantages in that having a preferential vote has also made this kind of election, it enforced some sectarian aspects. It made people vote preferentially to candidates of their own sect in the list.
Okay, Victoria, let me ask you, because you are an independent candidate, and there have been complaints that say you don't get the chance to compete at the same level with the media coverage, for example, that's afforded to bigger and more traditional parties with very deep pockets. What do you say to that?
This is true. In fact, this electoral law, you have a very high budget that you can use for elections. So if you are a rich candidate, you can definitely use media better, and you can afford to use all kind of support that you need. The problem is that even for some political parties, they are breaking the law by using public spaces to put their pictures, their photos, their flags. You can see that everywhere, like on the street, on any wall, while it's clear in the electoral law that we have to have an approval from local authority who would decide where to put any pictures or other aspect of the election campaign.
Okay.
Plus, it's very expensive for the television or billboards or any other media.
Okay, Halim, let me ask you, I mean, first on what Victoria was talking about there, I mean, is that unfair, or is that normal that bigger parties would, of course, have more money and therefore stronger campaigns? And also, I mean, why are some of these parties being allowed to break laws in the country by putting pictures in public spaces?
Well, I think in theory the proportional law should be better for independent candidates, but I tend to agree with Victoria in that there is a bit of unfairness. There's definitely unfairness in terms of the media coverage, and this is not something hidden. So, for example, there were articles in the printed press about the price for a candidate to go on TV, and depending on the time, depending on the slot, depending on the program. So it's not something hidden, it's not something that's being contested. And of course, I think independent candidates who don't come from the larger political parties will suffer because of that. So part of it is the media complicity with the larger political parties, and it is in large part due to the fact that the media in Lebanon, yes, we do have freedom, but a lot of the freedom, a lot of the press is owned by political parties, or most of the press is owned by political parties. And I think part of it in any elections, of course, if you have more money, you're going to be able to spend more, you're going to be able to come on the media
But Halim, that
more.
dynamic
and if you're part of a big party...
That dynamic sounds very similar to the United States.
It is, definitely, and I think that's part of why perhaps some of the independent candidates or the new candidates decided to go for the celebrity factor. So there were some celebrities who were asked to join some of the lists, perhaps in an attempt to cover up a bit for that lack of media coverage. I don't know what Victoria's position on that would be, but I think that's mainly one of the reasons why. But in general, I think that it also points out to one of the weaknesses in general from the independents and from the opposition, so to speak, to the status quo. There was, we didn't have a larger party, one coalition that perhaps started to work on the elections months ago, years ago, and was able to kind of engage the public and be able to have a real crowdfunding and get money perhaps to get more media coverage. So in a way, it's partly unfair and on the side of the political parties. On another side, it shows that independent candidates need to find a way to coalesce in larger groups to be able to compete.
But Victoria, I mean, do you at least feel you have a better chance of contesting this election than under the old system?
Of course. Like, even with all the negative sides that we can talk about in this new electoral law, there is no doubt that this is better than the old one, because now we only need between 8% and 20% to get one seat, let's say an average of 15%, which is much better than needing 50% of the votes to get one seat. That's not the point. It's definitely better. It could have been much better because we have a lot of interrogation mark, and we know that for these elections we have a great chance and we have like a high percentage of winning many seats in different districts. It's not that the point. It's just that we are fighting against not just money but also power, as I said before, because some political parties and some candidates are just breaking the law and no one can do anything about it. But to face that, we are using different techniques in our campaigns. It's not about getting celebrities. The people that we have who are running for elections are people who worked either on political issues or on fighting corruption for many years now. But also we are using a lot of new techniques and new ways of doing our campaign. Like, for example, to have our training for the volunteers instead of booking a very expensive hotel. What we did our training during a fire camp. We finished that and we spent a karaoke night, for example. So that was a motivation for the volunteers, and we did the training part in the nature instead of paying in a very fancy hotel, for example.
Okay, I'm sorry, Halim, it seemed you had a comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a very brief comment about the issue of why are the violations that are taking place in the elections not maybe being followed through. I think one of the reasons that's being cited, and I think it's a very important issue, is that I think the number is 17 ministers from the current government of 30 are actually running for Parliament. And the Minister of Interior is also, who's in charge of overseeing the elections, is also running for Parliament. So that's one of the major criticisms as well about the current electoral process.
Okay, Basem, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one should not have a selective memory or selective judgment. Some of those who are running on this platform used to serve as ministers in the past. And now we don't hear any criticism of the parties that they used to be with when they were ministers. And it seems to me that this criticism often is sort of selective. The other point is we've seen some of the independent candidates with lots of money spent in the media. And some of them actually are from the media. So I think the criticism is partly justified, but one needs to take it with a grain of salt. This law is not perfect, and I think we believe in evolution, not in revolution. These are the rules of the game right now.
Right.
The next Parliament will have to improve on this electoral law.
What do you think of breaking the laws in this?
Well, you know, you are running in an area, Victoria, where we are not competing with you. Yes.
I mean, in all the areas we can see the same. You know, I'm running in Matan, but Kulluna Watani is in 9 districts, Mr. Basem, and some of them where we are competing. So the idea is that in these specific districts
but
as
some of
well,
them were
there
in
is
government. Victoria, some of them were in government.
Okay, I appreciate
So
your debate here. However, I think we need to keep this as relevant.
One of the people running with you was in government. Hey.
We need to keep this as relevant as possible for a global audience that isn't aware of all the candidates involved and kind of the minutiae of the campaigning that's been underway.
Yes, Andrea. Yes.
Okay, but while I have you, Basem, I need to ask you this.
Andrea, there is a tradition in Lebanon of hanging up pictures.
Okay, fair enough. Listen, the fact that your party, Basem, led by Saad Hariri, is backed by Saudi Arabia has left some people somewhat cynical, given he so abruptly resigned while in Saudi Arabia just a few months back, only to retract that resignation, as we said, once he left Saudi Arabia. He was the one that originally put forth the concept of dissociation, and that got a lot of support, so that Lebanon is not at the mercy of regional powers going forward. How do you reconcile what happened 6 months ago or so with your platform today? How do supporters really feel about your party and its leader in this election?
Yeah, I honestly do not approve of your characterization about the relationship between the Prime Minister and Saudi Arabia. What happened a few months ago, the Prime Minister himself, he said this is something that I myself will disclose later, but I wish that this not to be discussed. So this is not a relevant issue to the elections right now.
Okay.
The relevant issue is Saudi Arabia supporting the future bloc with money? And the answer is no. No, the Prime Minister is running on a platform of educational reform, of political dialogue, of promoting sovereignty of Lebanon. And I think these are the main issues. The main issues that others are addressing seem to be neglecting some of the greater issues that concern Lebanese, which are fairly existential.
And we'll
I mean,
talk
you saw
about
Walid
those as
Jublak
well.
going around with the Druze community talking about the,
Right, but let me first, Halim,
but I think the characterization that you provided.
You believe it's unfair. I accept that. I'd like to ask Halim then, as a political analyst, as a Lebanese person yourself, do you think it's a relevant issue, what happened with Saad Hariri in Saudi Arabia and the concept of dissociation that had been pitched before? Does it matter to voters at all in this election?
If anything, I think what happened in last November in Saudi Arabia with the bizarre resignation of Mr. Hariri actually improved his popularity in Lebanon, because if you recall, during that episode, there was kind of a national consensus, even from people who don't necessarily like Hariri, that they didn't like the way in which that took place. And I think in some ways it actually helped his popularity. And I think on that issue it is maybe relevant. I agree with Mr. Basem that it's not directly relevant to the elections. But I also think that the position of Saudi Arabia, its regional positions vis-à-vis Iran, vis-à-vis Hezbollah, will definitely be relevant after the elections and during the formation of the government, in case there's going to be any sort of political escalation or hardening of positions when it comes to Hezbollah in Lebanon. But at this point, what seems to be fair is that maybe Saudi Arabia really and Iran at this point and there's an agreement to leave Lebanon, so to speak, or to support the current presidential settlement of President Aoun and Prime Minister Hariri, and in all likelihood, we're going to see a similar national unity government.
Okay. Then, Victoria, let me ask you, and this is what Basem had referred to earlier, that there are bigger issues at stake for the voters in Lebanon. So going into this election, I mean, what are the issues that are really most influencing voters? We've heard the economy, corruption, even refugees. What do you think really matters to voters?
What we did before putting our platform and our program, we had some canvassing for a few months now, and we were asking more than 8,000 people about their priorities. And the priorities that they mentioned were mainly about unemployment, health, and education. Those were the three priorities that people mentioned, and our platform as Sabaa Party are based on that. Mr. Basem also talked about sovereignty. Of course, it is very important, and this is why Kuluna Watani has this as a major point. But for us, sovereignty is also in our decisions, and this is why we refuse any influence from any other country.
Okay, Basem, I'll let you respond to that.
Yes, I think these are very valid issues, but as we come to election time, each of the constituencies in Lebanon has a more existential issue. The Sunni population in the north especially still remembers Syrian presence in Lebanon. And the issue of Syrian hegemony over Lebanon still is a major issue in elections. For the small Druze community, all that Walid Jumblat did was remind the Druze about the days when there was some oppression of the Druze. The Shia community talks about employment, but they're also worried about Israel and having a deterrence against Israel. We've seen in the mainstream Christian street talk about marginalization. And it seemed that it was a more incentive to draw in voters than the issues of unemployment.
Okay.
All the platforms of all parties concerned do address these issues.
Okay, sorry, Victoria, quickly, you can go ahead.
Okay, please. The issue of employment.
I just wanted to say that we should not divide.
As far as the issue of unemployment is concerned.
Sorry, I was giving Victoria a response. Go ahead, Victoria, quickly.
I just wanted to say that we cannot anymore divide people by their sects. What we are trying to do is to look at them as citizens and not as part of a specific sect and then divide what are their needs. We are all breathing the same air
Victoria,
that is
you
unhealthy right
their
now.
Fears.
It doesn't... But exactly, I'm addressing their hopes right now. We addressed their fears for many years and it didn't work.
Okay, I'll tell you what, we are down to our last minute, unfortunately.
I did not hear anything major about, for example...
I'm very sorry. I'd like to wrap up with you because you are the only member of this panel that is not running for a seat in Parliament. So just as a Lebanese voter, your personal perspective, do you think this new system and this election, first of all, are you looking forward to voting this time? Are you eager to try it? And do you really think it will bring the change the political dynamics of Lebanon that is needed?
I don't think so. I don't think it will change the political dynamics because a lot of the same people are going to be voted back in. As for what I'm going to do, it's the first time, this is the third time I'm voting, and I'm actually undecided between voting for the new independent candidates, Kuluna Watani, or not voting, and most probably I will go for voting with Kuluna Watani. But in terms of whether I'm expecting something major to happen because of my vote, I think not in this elections, but hopefully in upcoming elections.
Okay, Halim, we will have to leave it there.
It will, Halim, it will.
I'd like to thank all three of our panelists so much for joining us on this edition of the Newsmakers.